So, hello and welcome everyone to Relationships and Astrology. And for those of you who don't know us, I'm Margaret Gray in Dublin.
And I'm Armand Diaz in Long Island, New York.
So, we thought we'd do just this brief video on exploring really some of the tools that can help relationships during this kind of challenging times with the coronavirus. And the next image is really kind of probably how most of us are feeling right now. Certainly how I'm feeling. What about you, Armand?
Indeed. I'm hiding under the newspaper.
Yeah. And the next one is kind of really what, we're all really talking about. I mean, yeah, let's go into our panic room. So let's look at what can really help us in our chart during this time, because this is really what we're exploring. So the first thing is, I'll wait till you get that up, Armand.
I was going to maybe shrink us out of here.
Oh, okay, sure. So, the sun in our chart is about ourselves, our identity. So it's really important to stay very centered in ourselves. The moon, which we're going to talk a little bit more about, is self-nurturing. Mercury, of course, the planet of communication. So how do we understand what's going on? Because there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of fake news. There's a lot of distressing information. How do we sift out what makes sense to us and what's helpful to us? And how are we connecting with other people, particularly with our friends, because friendships are really, really important at the moment, and thank goodness for social media. Venus, how we value ourselves, how we keep ourselves safe. If we value ourselves, we'll take care of ourselves and take care of others. Mars, we need quite a bit of courage, I would say, at the moment. Really, every time we venture out our front door, it does take some courage at the moment. And Jupiter, meaning. What is the greater meaning of this? This is what we all want to know. Saturn, very crucial, self-protective boundaries. Very, very important for ourselves and our loved ones.
Very, very important, the Saturnian boundaries. It is certainly something that, in a physical sense and also in an emotional sense, of having those self-protective boundaries there.
Yes, so true, because there's so much information going around, so much news. Now, this is just an image of, reminding us of the myth of Inanna, who went down. It's a Sumerian myth about Inanna going down to visit her sister Ereshkigal in the underworld. And this is a little bit what it's feeling like, certainly at this stage, that we are required to go internally. We're required to look at ourselves. We're required to do that deeper work. And yet, the interesting thing about this is that we're also still connecting with people far and wide, but it's not that physical connection. So if you're not familiar with this with this mythology, I really suggest you have a look at it. And Melanie Reinhardt has some wonderful information on her website, which is just melaniereinhardt.com.
It's an extraordinary image, especially as at this point in time we have the Aries new moon, and we have the cats, the lions, the fire there, and that's an interesting image. It's I see the
quite powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
So this is a reminder that we're kind of never truly alone, although we're not able to have physical contact, and to kind of keep in mind and really ask ourselves, how is this going to affect our relationships? How is it affecting our relationships currently? Because even with children, even though the risk is rather small for them to catch anything, there's still always a little bit of a risk, and they could be carriers. So the way parents would normally interact, or carers with children, has really changed, as well as the fact that children are at home and not at school, so they're not interacting as much with their peers. So is there less intimacy? Is there more intimacy? Is there more sexual intimacy with significant others because we're at home, we have more time? Or is there less intimacy because we're so afraid of kind of, being contagious? Also, sorry, Armand, yeah?
No, go ahead.
I was just also going to say, an interesting thing I've noticed is because we're so much more on social media at the moment, and we're communicating more with friends also by phone, we're telling everyone everything, and there's less in our lives because it's more limited. And usually they're the kind of things we probably would discuss with our partner, what's gone on in our day. So I'm also wondering how that's going to affect our communication with our significant other, how that's going to change.
Isn't it an interesting fact of social media that we are, on the one hand, very, very concerned with privacy, That's a big thing, of
Yes.
course, with the internet and social media. We're very concerned about privacy, and on the other hand, it's like we're telling everybody everything anyway. It's like
Absolutely.
on the one hand,
Absolutely.
because well, we don't want it to go further, but we're telling more. It's like a gigantic online confessional in some respects.
Totally. And I think that's kind of really the next image, what it describes, that we're connecting. And, the positive of this is that we're connecting far and wide with people all across the world. I don't know about you, but I have connected more with friends in other countries over the past week than I have in a very long time.
I've become a social media recluse, but that's me. And I would understand that's going to be.
That's your And that's your transits too. I mean, that depends. Everybody, what transits are you going through? And be aware of the people you're living with, what their transits are at the moment, because that's really going to affect how they respond to the virus and also how their interaction is. So it's not all to do with the virus, it's to do with what's going on in each of our charts.
That's really quite an image, boy. I could look at that for hours.
Isn't that powerful? Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And it kind of, I think it's also a comforting image in that we're not on our own, so that's the beauty of social media. So let's look a little bit about the moon and the different elements, because this is really what we always come back to. And you and I talk a lot about the moon, Armand, but it's so crucial. If our moon is in fire, how do we self-soothe? Because moon in fire really likes a sense of hope, and that's very important. So be careful, moon in fire. If you're reading a lot of information that's very negative and saying, this is going to go on for years and years and years, it might take away your sense of hope. And that's really, really important to cling to, that there is a better future. There is going to be something wonderful. And, if you've got a moon in fire, think about ways you can connect that are fun as well. Maybe shout out to your neighbors if you live in an apartment and there's balconies, and, maybe do something online that can be kind of playful. That's really a little bit of fun.
Fire moons like action too. Fire doesn't stay in the same place for very long, and I think fire moons like to get moving with things, particularly Aries and Sagittarius moons. But the fire moons in general like to keep moving, and if we're sort of under house arrest as we are, it could be really challenging for fire moons.
Yes, it can certainly get restless. And I think things like, online exercise programs or yoga programs or learning, Aries, we forget that the moon in fire loves learning, particularly moon in Aries. So learn something new, learn a new language so you can actually practice with somebody in another country. We really need to be creative, and moon in fire can be incredibly creative. So moon and earth. It finds it easier to kind of be still, although it likes to keep busy while it's being still, which sounds like a kind of contradiction. But moon and earth can get pleasure from cooking. It can get pleasure from, I just heard a friend of mine in Italy was saying she's actually creating a vegetable plot in her garden. She's already got some beautiful fruit trees, so her kids are helping her do that. So think of something earthy. Moon and earth does need that connection with nature. And so even if you've just got plants on your balcony, maybe just, water them, spend some time with them, spend some time out in the fresh air. The hardest thing, I think, for moon and earth is the lack of physical contact. That's really, really difficult. So maybe think about things that can nurture you, like, materials, pillows that are comfortable, or redecorating your house, creating some beauty around you, or looking back over old photographs. That might, that can provide some comfort.
I can see the Capricorn moons getting out the spring cleaning, really, really getting going on that.
Not to mention the Virgo moons, of course.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts about moon in air?
Well, moon and air likes to be sociable, likes to connect, and that could be a little bit hard to do now. I think that the strategy for moon and air is to spend time on social media or, the telephone. I mean, we still have telephones, so you can actually talk to people. That's a good thing. And then to do the things that you feel are, in some way or another connecting you to others.
Yes, so important, because air needs a kind of moon in air needs a wide variety. I deal of ideas, of kind of something to draw upon. And it can get bored quite easily, a little bit like moon in fire. So be aware that if you're sharing a house with people with moon in air, that they may want to talk more than you if you've got, for example, a moon in earth or water. So it's important. And again, things like even podcasts, radio shows, also writing would be very good for a moon in air. You know, even to record things on a recorder, plug it into the computer and start writing a book can be very good for moon in air. Just to keep those ideas, those thoughts kind of going, you know, moving, in case, you know, the people around you are kind of tired of talking and want to rest.
Would you shut up for a minute?
Exactly. Yes. Yes. What about moon in water, Armand?
Well, I think earth and water have an easier time of it than fire and air. You know, certainly my Cancer moon made sure there was enough food in the house, and there's a lot of cooking going on. I think though that the tough thing for moon and water, while it's probably pretty okay with some of the social limitations, the thing with moon and water is that there can be a lot of security orientation, and I mean, to be honest, fear is
Yes.
is a big one with the moon and water. And I think that is, you know, the need to be, you know, careful and self-protective on the one hand, without really getting paranoid on the other. It's a delicate balance, and it's a delicate balance for everybody, especially moon and water.
And also, I think, you know, moon and water needs a lot of empathy, and it's kind of hard to get empathy from other people when everybody is kind of distressed at the moment. But also that a lot of people with moon and water are empaths by nature. And so be careful that you're not also picking up, you know, a lot of the general distress around you as well as your own, particularly if you're living in a small space with people where you're kind of not used to being with them all the time in a confined space. Just really make sure you clear yourself emotionally, because you could be carrying their distress as well. Not to mention people, you know, I've got a good friend who's working on the front lines as a nurse, and that's incredibly challenging at the moment, because the level of kind of preparations and distress that's going on with that is really quite scary. So if you've got a moon in water, which you and I have, Armand, really, it's like really nurturing, taking care of yourself. And that's where Saturn comes in terms of boundaries, you know, what you're watching, what you're hearing, how much you're taking on. That's very, very important, and not so easy to do when you're sharing a space with people.
Definitely, the empathic side of things, especially for the Pisces moon, but all water moons have an empathic side.
So this is really the internal marriage, you know, when we look at the sun and the moon. And at the moment, you know, if you think about the sun as a little bit more that our external identity when we're out in the world, and the moon our more personal home, you know, emotional identity, those two are really being brought together right now for so many of us who are at home, except people, of course, on the front line working. So it's going to be interesting to see how we merge those. For anybody who's not used to working at home and is used to being out in the outer world, their identity, your solar identity is a very external one and has now been brought in. So be aware in your relationships at home that if one of you is used to working at home, like I'm certainly used to working at home quite a bit, but if somebody is coming from the outside world and not used to that, it may take a little bit of adjusting to put those two together.
You know, it's an interesting thing. I also work at home quite a bit. You know, I'm on the phone most of the day with clients and doing things from my house. And the ironic thing is that now that I sort of have to be here, it's suddenly irksome. I'd love to be able to get out and do something somewhere else.
We're contrary beings, definitely, Armand. And this is really about working at home, that, you know, so many of us are now bringing our work into the private space. And how do we negotiate that? How do we negotiate that intrusion on the people who are used to being at home or who also are at home with us? How do we set boundaries also around home and work? If you're working for, you know, for the corporate world, it may be hard to kind of stop emails coming in and your phone pinging late at night, even when you're with your loved ones, particularly if there is time differences. Now, no doubt that goes on generally, but now it's not just your phone, it's also your computer. It's a lot of things that come into the space.
Definitely.
So this is just a reminder. This may be how we're all going to end up because we're going to be on the computer for so much. We're going to have headphones on and so on. So just a fun reminder, really.
Get some food.
And just a reminder, more time for sexual intimacy. So that's kind of maybe on the plus side for people who are usually busy, exhausted, stressed out. And now there's some time, not just sexual intimacy, but also emotional intimacy to actually share vulnerability, to share fears. And that's what connects us together as well. It's not just the good times. This is going to really bring out also, during the tough times, how we connect.
Well, it really depends who you're stuck in the house with then, doesn't it?
Well, yes, yes, absolutely. And just ways to connect from isolation, for anybody who has, and please keep in mind also that some people may not have access to, social media, to computers, particularly maybe some of the older generation. So, this might be a good time to maybe help people if they can, if they want to, maybe get them an iPad or, a simple computer and maybe help them learn a little bit. So, because it does make such a difference for anybody who's isolated to actually be able to see a loving face, a familiar face across the screen really is very comforting.
I wonder if we're not going to see stress on some of the networks and so on as more people are at home.
I know, I hope not. And of course, ways to shop. This is going to change our ways to shop, a lot less interaction. Remember, though, that actually we are used to relating to people all the time. I was thinking this yesterday, I was out shopping for some groceries. And when I was at the supermarket at the cash, the lady wisely kept her face away from me and I kept my face away from her. And she just kind of muttered a couple of things. And we were both purposely avoiding each other. But it suddenly dawned on me that actually I'm so used to chatting to whoever's at the cash till, whether it's about have you had a good day, what's it been like, are you busy, whatever. And that there is that very, small social interaction that for some people, maybe people who live on their own, who are older, they may depend on that. So that's going to be a whole shift. And for people working a cash desk, that kind of makes their life pleasant, that somebody actually chats them and asks them how they are. So now we're really going into a world where it's going to be automated. And I wonder whether that will change dramatically or not.
Yeah, I think that one of the interesting things about this that we can't know just yet, but it is going to change the way that we do a lot of things beyond the crisis itself, beyond this sort of acute phase. And there's definitely, we have to, it would be great if we would think about that as a collective rather than just letting it happen.
Totally. And this is really one of my favorite images. And I would really encourage all of you to go online and look at the videos of all of this. There's been the most amazing singing, dancing music coming from Italy, who is one of the countries really worst affected by this virus after China. And, it's just been so moving. It's the resilience of the human spirit and finding ways to connect even within the isolation. But this also, remember, is our Mercury. And remember that our Mercury needs to communicate in different ways. So, think about where your Mercury is by sign, by house, by aspect, because, especially a Mercury in air, it really needs that communication. But a Mercury in earth really enjoys seeing somebody else. So the joy for Mercury in earth to see somebody on a balcony and playing beautiful music, is just wonderful. Same for Mercury in water. I mean, music is just fabulous, and dancing. They actually had a disco somewhere as well with dancing. So do keep that in mind, that our Mercuries need different forms of communication. And, this is the time to initiate something. You don't need to wait for a whole country to do it. You can do it yourself in your local area. Just go out on your doorstep. If you're living in a house and if you're in an apartment, you can go out your window or your balcony. And this started in Italy, which is tutto andrà bene, which means, everything will be okay, which was children started doing this rainbow. And again, it's just the courage, the resilience, that even amidst these very, very challenging circumstances, the human spirit is actually coming out. And this is all about us relating to each other. This is about children relating to adults and us relating to the people around us and even people we don't know. So, I think that in itself gives us some hope.
That's an interesting picture.
So thank you, everyone. We leave you with this, with this lovely quote from Italy that everything will be okay. We don't know when, of course, but in the meantime, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we look forward to seeing you online again.
See you soon.
Take care, Armand. Bye-bye.